Welcome back to another episode of Anxiety Chats. Today we are talking to Yelena, a hypnotherapist who helps women with anxiety. Am I saying your name right? Yelena? I think there's lots of ways to say that name.
Exactly. There's a lot of ways, and that's a good way. My name is Yelena, but I go by Lena to make life easier over the people who try to say it. But whichever way you want to say it, totally fine with me.
Oh, that's really nice. So I described you as a hypnotherapist who helps women with anxiety. Would you say that describes what you do?
Yes, I think it's pretty exact right there. I also add a coach because I feel like there's those two components of my work. I'm a hypnotherapist and I do a lot of education and coaching at the same time.
Cool. And I noticed as well on your Instagram that you help particularly women that are working in business and entrepreneurial women. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's definitely a passion of mine for sure. Because I'm one of them, you know.
Yeah. It's scary. Like I know a lot of female entrepreneurs that have lots of different businesses, and I think being a woman in that field comes with its own challenges. So I was excited to see that you were helping particularly women in business.
Yes, I definitely agree. I feel like as women, we are more prone to anxiety to start with. And then when we deal with something
Mhm.
that's so full of anxiety, like having your own business, there's anxiety, not anxiety, uncertainty. It's full of uncertainty. Every step you take,
Mm.
um, yeah, definitely a fertile ground for the anxiety to develop itself in.
100%. And like, yeah, a lot of societal things. And I think you're in Hawaii right now. Is that right?
Yes, I'm on a big island in Hawaii.
That is so, so cool. Like, I have a misconception, I think, in my head that if you live in Hawaii, it's just like a really chilled, grounded place to live where people don't experience anxiety.
I wish I wish it was this way for me. I mean, that's true. A lot of people come here for vacation, right? And vacation should be that
Mhm.
time when we really take the time away from the hustle and bustle of our regular lives that tends to be anxiety provoking. But for me, to be honest, having good size chunk of land to take care of, plus my business, plus just wanted to take care of myself. There's
Mhm.
always something else to do. There's never like that slowing down
Yeah.
time, which is so essential to regulate ourselves, unless I
Mm.
deliberately make a choice to have one.
And we need to choose that time for ourselves, don't we? No matter what situation you're in. And it can be harder for other women. Like lots of women have different needs and different lives. But it's so amazing if you're able to choose that time for yourself. It's so, like you said, it's so important.
Hmm. Yeah. And if it's just the one conscious breath that you can do, and that's all you got, that's, great right there. I'm just thinking about all of the women that I know who like have multiple children or even just one child or have like multiple things to attend to. There's no not
Hmm.
necessarily an opportunity to like, I'm just gonna go and take 15 minutes. 15 minutes, not really that much, really. But even that might be not available during that time.
No.
So if all we can do is hide in a bathroom, and that's what I do, hide in a bathroom and take a couple just full, nice, juicy breath, like, and get back
Hmm.
to it.
I love that so much. I need that as a soundbite just to play. I think that's it. It's actually more simple than we think, isn't it? Like sometimes it's just about trying to access where our breathing is even and not judging it and just being like, "Ah, my breathing's here. How can I make it
Mhm.
maybe more calm and more deep?" I really love that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
one of the
Yeah,
questions I
go
was
ahead. Hmm.
interested in was that you've lived in different parts of the world. Um, and I've only ever lived in Scotland my whole life. So I was curious about how
Mm.
you'd experienced, talking about mental health or healing or anything spiritual. Was it different in different places that you've lived in?
I lived in Russia and the States, primarily. And definitely where I'm coming from the time that I'm coming from in Russia, I graduated high school in 2006, wanted to become a psychotherapist right off the bat, which was a new thing. It was not a like what people do. My parents were like, "You don't want to become a lawyer or a banker? What's wrong with you?" Mental health was and still is not necessarily a taboo subject, but it's more of still like something that you resolve in between you and your friends, your family members. There's not really as much of a culture, especially back then, it wasn't to go to a mental health specialist and talk to them. It's been changing really since that. I have friends who
Mm,
live there now who are seeing a therapist for a number of years, but they're still definitely they're minority, um, a considerable
mm,
minority, because even though like people now beginning to recognize that it could be a good thing to talk to someone who is trained in a certain modality, still there's like, ooh, if I go to see a therapist, I must be crazy, and it's not necessarily just in Russia that kind of
mm,
mindset that's still prevalent. There's many other countries that people think that way, even in the States, where a lot of people have been much more like warmed up to the idea of seeing a therapist. I like to give an
mm,
example from my the time I went to grad school. I studied social work, and we had a class I was taking with another, I think it was like 18 of us. All of us were women, maybe one, there was maybe one guy. And
mm,
it was a clinical class. It was teaching us how to do therapy with in-person therapy one-on-one. And when they asked like who had therapy growing up or who's hasn't having a therapy right now, everybody except me lift their hand like that was me, and I was like, whoa,
mm,
like that was no such a thing when I was growing up. You wouldn't send your child to a therapist if he had a problem. It's still like
mm,
children and mental health is a very different topic. Adults do go to therapy in Russia at this point, but still not
mm.
that many of them.
I understand that. It's kind of like I think there's still that taboo here actually about sending children to therapy because it's like people
Hmm.
assume that you're putting a label on your child or something like that and saying my child is damaged or whatever, and it's like that's not it at all. It's actually one of the most caring and kind things you can do
Right.
if you feel that your child needs that space. But I imagine I don't have any children, so I imagine it's a really difficult topic, but that's also really cool that all those
Hmm.
people in the room felt able to put their hands up and say, "Yeah, I've had a therapy. I'm proud of it." I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that wouldn't happen in Russia, though. That would something okay to do in the
Mm,
environment of the grad school where everybody's basically wanted to become a social worker, being in some sort of a helping profession or another. And we understand the value of that kind of a relationship.
mhm,
So I feel like people felt pretty safe and maybe even proud that they actually had an experience like that, because they could use it to help people now, because they was in a receiving end themselves, so they know what it feels like to be a client or a
Mm.
patient.
And it's another thing. I actually studied counselling only for a year, and we had to have supervision. Like it was essential that we had a therapist. We wouldn't actually be allowed to go on to be therapists unless we had supervision or therapy ourselves. So it's
Mhm.
probably takes a bit of the pressure off and a bit of the scariness away is that your therapist is also in therapy, probably.
True, true, definitely.
And another question I was interested in is you're really interested in connection and like connection of humans and how that impacts us. And I have a friend who's uh, quite similar to you. She does EFT, which is like the energy tapping
Mhm,
with clients,
mhm,
which I find interesting. And she also believes community is absolutely essential to our health and not even just mental health,
mhm,
generally our health. So I find that so
mhm,
interesting. But I think nowadays we do live quite separately, generally, and we can maybe be untrusting of each other, like in the street and stuff like that. We don't necessarily always feel safe enough to connect with people, especially strangers. So, how important do you think connection is, and how do you think we can kind of integrate more?
Oh, I believe that connection is just so important for our mental health and physical health, because our mental health and our physical health is so very much connected as
Mm-hmm.
well. They're not just like those two separate things as we would like to think about them. And I'm getting a tea
Mm-hmm.
from my husband, so I'm just gonna continue talking and
Oh,
get it from him. That's the example of connection right there. That's important for my mental health, you know. Um,
cheers.
and yes, you have one as well. Cheers. Yes. So that was just really something nice that happened, right? That expression of care and love, and um, something that's so essential for us to feel good. And it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody like a spouse. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be somebody who is like online sending you a really nice text, which some of my followers do sometimes online, and it feels so good. And I do the same for other people, and it just lights me up, and it's such a beautiful thing to experience. So even on just this very
Mm-hmm.
basic everyday level, I can see how when I feel connected to other people, I feel safer. And it's not anything
Mm-hmm.
new for us mammals, this kind of types of animals
Mm-hmm.
who are have evolved to feel safe in groups. And I'm now tapping into the polyvagal theory about that's I'm learning about right now, which I'm still very much a newbie in, but it's all about connection and how our nervous system is has evolved to feel safe in the presence of a safe other. So I feel like connection
Mm-hmm.
is extremely important for that reason, because yeah, biologically, we are programmed to engage with other people and find the safety within them. We also can self regulate, of course, but even if you think about how we learn self regulation, where do we begin? Is in our childhood. With hopefully our caregiver being caring enough to help us regulate our emotions when we go through those moments of whatever we're experiencing when we're little, when we don't understand what's going on with us. Ideally, that person will be there for us to help us soothe ourselves. So then develop this
Mm-hmm.
ability ourselves. But we never really lose this need or yearning for staying connected to other human being, because it's how deeply ingrained in us as a species. So that's just to speak
Mm-hmm.
to connection. And oh my goodness, how important it is for anxiety out of all of the things. I mean, it's definitely important for mental health overall, but anxiety is all about feeling unsafe. There's that deep
Yeah.
deep, not fear, I would say, that is a component of anxiety as much as like the cognitive aspect of it, which is all of the catastrophizing and thinking and worrying. And there is that
Mm.
sense of fear in our body that's present, and those two kind of make anxiety what it is. So I feel like we can either go and look into the cognitive aspect of anxiety when we want to change it, like maybe want to learn some skills to really like unwind our thoughts and challenge them. And but at the same time, unless we're really paying attention to how our body feels, if we still feel fearful, it doesn't really matter what we think. On top of this, if there is that still fear in our body and it feeds all of those worry
Mhm.
thoughts, it filters, we kind of begin filter our thoughts through that sense of fear. It would be really hard to calm down unless we take care of how our body feels. And that's where feeling connected is so important. And I'm just going to say one more thing because I'm going on, off a tangent here. And then I'll go back to how to integrate the community and the connection aspect into our life. Okay, I'm going to do this anyway, even though I'm like, okay, this is a tangent. The sense of connection. Community is one way to bring in into our life. Of course, it's such a huge way, and that's if it's available for you when you feel anxious. If you have a safe other that you can call upon, that you can kind of engage with when you need, that's great. And at the same time, we can also become rooted in our own breath, like we were talking earlier about. We can become rooted in and connected to our beliefs like spirituality or nature, or just like feeling safe in
Mm.
our home, ideally if it's a safe place for us. So there's many different ways to find that connection when we feel anxiety, but it is, well, regardless how we find it, is still at the very much foundation of this whole process of feeling calmer and feeling more centered. I hope that was an okay tangent to go on to right there.
Perfect.
Thank you, because it's just the connection, it's all, we're all super connected.
Mm.
And how do we bring more of that in the community, right? That was the second part of that question. I actually
Mm.
definitely took my time and thought of it before this meeting because I was just trying to be fair and see what is that going on in the world right now? What are those trends that we see
Mm.
um, that can inform my opinion about this? So on the one hand, I feel like there's so much technology that's out there that allowing us to connect with people like we are doing right now from all over the world. And that's
Mm.
beautiful. I really enjoy talking to my
Mm.
followers and people I follow on Instagram from UK, South Africa, Australia, you name it. And to be honest, I I feel like I do feel connected, but I also don't think it can ever replace in person connection,
Mhm.
or like texting for me. A lot of or emailing, which we do a lot of these days, can ever replace a conversation even like this, like we're doing right now, because texting is robbing us of so many things. It doesn't allow us to hear the other person's voice or see their facial expressions, and that's a lot where we what we connect with when we connect with. For us to feel safe and connected to
Mhm.
another person, we need to have a little more information than the text, which actually allows us to interpret them in many different ways. How many people read a text before
Yeah.
and they read it in a certain tonality of voice and assumed that that person meant something terrible and horrible and beginning, and then they begin to feel anxious and stuff like that, because texts allow for that uncertainty to still be there, which is taken care of by when we actually interact with each other, either like we're doing right now, ideally in person. So technology is great, and at the same time, um, they might be adding more problems to this whole equation in a sense,
Mhm.
unless, but we got to be just careful with how we use them. And
Yeah.
another thing that I thought when I was answering this question is what is separating us these days is and I don't really see it for myself as much, but for other people, especially United States, is politics. We are getting more polarized. We are either supposed to be in this camp or that camp, and they're not friends. They can't be together. Like you can have conversations,
Mhm.
you can't find the middle ground. And that's very isolating in a sense. We are
Mhm.
losing that sense of like unified identity, and that's
Mhm.
just like the backdrop of what's going on in the world. And the COVID pandemic also got us used to being inside our homes, interacting on the
Mhm.
screen. And for I know that for a lot of people, going back into like hanging out with other people in person was kind of challenging, because even for me, I had a first client after the
Mhm.
pandemic in person. It was a friend of a friend. It wasn't like a complete stranger. And still, I noticed how my nervous system was responding to them being in such a proximity to me, because I was so, I kind of
Mhm.
like had to get back into this being comfortable with the other person in the same room who I didn't know that well. And I'm
Mhm.
sure that happens on a much bigger scale in all of the other rooms that's out there in the world. And it will take us some time to get back into the sense of safety within those rooms. You know, how like people like open air
Mhm.
spaces for their reason because of all the virus and everything. And it's ironic because like we feel safety with other people, and the pandemic broke that apart. And while we were isolated from each other, we had nothing else, our system had nothing else to do but just to have this intense fear that was not soothed by anybody else who could come and co-regulate there with us in that moment. So it's
Mhm.
a definitely interesting time that we're living. And I guess that's the backdrop that we're working with. And how to integrate that community. And I'm still not answering your question, but I'm gonna do it right now. I guess it was important for me to give the context. I hope that's okay to all of my thoughts.
Yeah.
I still feel like if we can, if it feels like something available to us, because it's not necessarily available for everybody, to seek out
Mm.
those in-person encounters with the people that we can connect with. Maybe start somewhere where it's easy, like there something that you're passionate about that you can talk about forever, like hypnotherapy for me. If I find another person in a room that happens to be interested in the same subject, oh my god, we gotta, especially if they're introvert and they very much satisfied just with my company, like I'm satisfied with theirs, we're just gonna
Mhm.
get to it. And this shared topic will be a beautiful entry point into a possibility of relationships. And so I encourage all of my friends right now who in different parts of the world and they've been quite isolated from other people to start like getting out there and see what's out there if they feel comfortable enough to connect, or maybe
Mhm.
um, get into the online groups if that's where you feel connected, because that's a
Mhm.
option right there. It's not as of, I guess,
Mhm.
multidimensional as an in-person conversation, but it's also satisfy that need as best as we can, if that's all we can do right now. Um, yeah, I think that's. I can talk a little, of course, more about like you know the community like events in general. I love when people throw down those like community markets, and there's a lot of them right now before the holidays,
Mm,
and that's such a beautiful place to meet other people and mingle because everybody in this like festive mood, and you actually talk to people instead of buying on Amazon. I have no judgment against people who buy things on Amazon, but we're never ever
mhm,
really able to really make eye contact or have a conversation with someone we're buying things from.
mhm,
And when you buy a thing from somebody who made it or like somehow like participated in this particular item coming into the world, it's such an experience in and of itself.
yeah.
So I feel like this is, we can be very proactive in terms of how we build the community. Um, and even if we're introverted, we can do those little baby steps into the world and draw in, and that's what I've been doing all my life, draw in only a few ones, only of those people. It doesn't have to be everybody, but those few who you can feel like they can commit to you, you can commit to them, and you can um, make some steps towards each other. um, yeah, not gonna go on a tangent because that might be a difficult thing in and of itself for some people to commit to a relationship, even a friendship, you know. But if you have this
Mhm.
desire, I just want to encourage everybody to go out and exercise it because there's other people in the world who wants to be your friend or who just wants friends in general. And maybe you meet each other in the right place in the right time and spark up that conversation and you take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. That was so amazing. I know connection, the word connection is a huge word. It's got so much coming off it. And I love that you covered friends, spouses, and also yourself. I think, there's so many different ways to connect, and nature too. There's so many different ways to connect. And to somebody with social anxiety or introverted, like you said, it can be a daunting thought to go out there and spark up conversation. But I think it's
Mhm,
like you said, kind of like
mhm.
it's slow, steady. You don't have to immediately go out to a gig or a party. You can start slow by connecting with
Right.
yourself. Like, how would that look for you? And then maybe connecting in other little ways with nature, with the outside. It's like, yeah, um, yeah. There's just so many things there that you said that were just amazing. Like, oh,
Mm.
connection is a
Mhm.
huge word, but it's like
Right there. Mhm.
sometimes when I'm cooking dinner and I'm just, whatever I'm cooking, doesn't really matter. I'll think about all of the hands that it took to get the end product of like the farmers
Mhm.
digging up potatoes and then the people that bag up the potatoes and the people that then bring them to the
Mhm.
shop and then the people that there's so many
Mhm.
without connection and without um the
Mhm.
simple and old ways of doing things, so many things wouldn't happen. It's
Mhm.
not Amazon, like you said, like I shop on Amazon sometimes, but it's like um the simple and slow ways of doing things really are essential for so
Mhm.
many things like connection. Um, so thank you so much for sharing that. That was really beautiful.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for listening. All of my tangents right there. Hmm.
I honestly can't wait till this podcast comes out so I can listen to what you just said again. And you touched a little bit on the you touched a little bit on the vagus nerve, and that's something I'm really interested in because I've heard people talking about it a little bit, but I've never fully understood exactly what is exactly the polyvagal nerve and why could it be important for people that have anxiety to be aware of?
Mhm. Um, the vagus nerve, which is actually a bundle of nerves, it's not just the one nerve, as we might think from its name. It's a whole net of nerves that just covers our whole body from the inside, not the whole body, but everything from our brainstem. It goes around our neck and our throat and our heart and our lungs and all of the organs of the abdominal area, all the way down into it, like the small intestine. So it's the longest nerve in our body. And our parasympathetic nervous system, that one that's responsible for resting and digesting, that's how a lot of people like to describe it, is made of the 75 to 80% of it made of the parasympathetic nerve uh, fibers. There's other nerves in there as well, but definitely the vagus nerve is the most prominent out of all of them. And that's why we focus on it so much. And
Mm.
it's like this two-way street highway between our brain and our all of our organs that constantly communicate. Our organs send the information to our brain sends information to our organs, and they ideally maintain us in this kind of like a homeostasis place where we feel okay, when we feel just enough engaged with the reality, not too activated, not like dissociated, but like in the sweet spot where we can make decisions, see our options, think rationally. And that's like the sweet spot where we feel regulated, and it's very much closely connected with our feeling safe. And the vagus
Mm.
nerve, it's it has two parts to it, and that's what the polyvagal theory talks about a lot. The what poly means, I think it means plural or multiple, and that's what it speaks to. And when it comes to anxiety, both of those parts of that system are very important. The one that's below abdomen and above, but the one that's below abdomen, I think it's called dorsal-vagal. A little bit of a terms vocabulary here. If you want to explore this, please go ahead, especially for people who find themselves dissociating and shutting down a lot. That is a very interesting topic to get into, because that part of the parasympathetic system is also protective, but it's can be causing us feeling those shutting down states if we are getting into survival mode. For anxiety, though, a lot of the
Mm.
anxiety lives in the sympathetic nervous system, in that flight fight response. When we are a little bit too engaged, when we're a little too activated, the hypervigilant, and that's just the way I see it, is our sympathetic nervous system, which is not the vagus nerve, but the system that kind of on the other side of the scale from that one, that are responsible for mobilizing us. It's a little bit too on and too activated. And for us to bring us back to the place of equilibrium, we want to lean into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically our vagus nerve. And even the polyvagal theory even talks about such a thing as a vagal brake, they call it. It's something that's attached to our heart. It's like a pacemaker for our heart. It regulates our heart rate and many other things. And this is the place where we regulate our state. Basically, we can either speed up a little bit and get a little bit more energy if we feel like we need to get activated, or when we notice when we're a little too activated and getting kind of a bit dysregulated. And everybody will have their own sense of when that happens for their body. For me personally, I can notice the shortness of my breathing. I can notice like my stomach tensing up. This is a moment when I know, like, okay, my nervous system is become a little bit too activated, and I want to lean into my parasympathetic system, into my vagus nerve, to bring it back to balance. And there is a plenty of different exercises that we can do on our own,
Mhm.
breathing, singing, meditation, physical exercises. that engage the vagus nerve. And also, there's all of those neural exercises that we can do in the presence of the safe other. Uh, Eye contact, talking to somebody else who can talk to us in this safe, beautiful tonality. That's also all goes towards activating the vagus nerve. So that's why that connection and community piece is very sweet and important. And it comes up a lot in relationship. And I just want to share a personal example of that in my relationship with my husband here. I
Mhm.
taught him recently the term co-regulation. Since now I'm about all about the nervous system. I'm throwing it in everything. I'm like, can we come and co-regulate right now? Just give me a hug. I'm having a hard moment. Like I'm having a hard time right now. And it's nice when he's available for that. And another day we had a bit of a difficult morning and my nervous system was responding to it. And I can recognize it and I'm okay with that. I know that when he's not in the best of his moods, I get a little bit of that um, hypervigilance in me. And it's not because I necessarily had it in traumas in the past, even though I had some difficult events in my life. But I know that this is how my system responds because now there is a bit of uncertainty in his behavior for my system. So I got to be alert.
Mm.
And he was a bit of snappy with me, so to say, and I start shutting down as a response. And then he came to me, noticing that, and is like, "Okay, let's co-regulate. Let's hug." I'm like, "Yes, it's working." So
Oh.
that was the sweetest moment of that morning. I'm like, yeah, this is how we can apply it if we know this information about ourselves. We can ideally educate people around us that that's something that we might want at that
Mm.
time. And that necessarily means that all of us should like go ahead and co-regulate and try to find that other being in their presence. There's a lot of ways, like you were highlighting it before, to self-regulate in that moment. And I was just talking about singing, breathing, all of those things. I feel like super
Mm.
empowering to have in your toolbox because it's not necessarily a thing to have another person. And it's also not necessary that the other person is safe emotionally at that moment. I would not necessarily attempt to co-regulate with my husband when we are in the state of a conflict. I don't think that would be the best idea necessarily. So I feel like it's very
Mhm.
empowering to have all of the tools in your toolbox that you can connect with yourself, even with something that very
Yeah.
physical. And that's, I guess I'll stop right there. Like something that I do, I just put my hands under my heart, and that's where a lot of the vagus nerve lives. That's specifically responsible for the sense of connection and safety. This is the area. There's
Mm.
a there's other part that lives below our diaphragm and our abdomen. That's kind of responsible for digestion. The safety, the connection one is in our heart. Not even nothing in surprising, right? The heart is where we connect with people. So I just like put my hands on my heart and breathe. And that's I've been
Mm.
doing even before I knew about anything about the polyvagal theory. That just felt good to my system. So a lot of times we already have those tools that we can
Mm.
use in a moment when we feel kind of agitated, dysregulated, and they're intuitive. They're intuitive because
Yeah.
they've been there for millennia. And polyvagal theory, even I might I can't pronounce his last name. The professor who been a main proponent and advocate of that theory, he even says like when you learn about polyvagal theory, you will learn that it just confirms a lot of your intuitions, everything that you know about human beings. It's just
Mm.
confirms them. That's not really
Yeah.
anything new. we already know that connecting and taking a deep breath and like really tending to our heart feels good already. So that's my
Mm.
answer. Again, I hope it's okay. I'm like
Oh,
that. I'm
it's
going in little different pathways.
oh, that was so perfect. It's also so interesting. I've always believed that human beings that struggle with mental health or physical health or anything, I mean more, I think more, emotional and mental health stuff, a lot of the times have the answers within them. They have the answers, they have the things that they know, like you said, intuition of what will feel good.
Mhm,
But it's nice to be reminded, and I think that's a great question to ask yourself when you're feeling really, really anxious and panicky is what would feel good right now. And so I am
mhm,
definitely going to go after this call and look up polyvagal because with my anxiety, I often feel it in my tummy. Like I'll feel just like I'll get a suddenly sore tummy or need to run to the bathroom or, and I know a lot of
mhm,
women experience the same thing. And I've heard people say your tummy is like your second brain. And I guess this
mhm.
explains why we've got so many nerves there.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was just reading yesterday about the brain gut connection that the scientific community now is all about. Because yeah, there's so many nerve endings in there, and they are part of that parasympathetic nervous system. And it's no wonder that when we are activated or in defense mode, survival mode, we can experience such things as like needing to run to the bathroom or like tense feeling in there. It's very fascinating, and I feel like it just reminds us how important it is to take care of the body as much as we can. Want to take care of the cognitive part
Mm-hmm.
of the anxiety. We also want to make sure that we don't overlook all of those physical representations of what we're going through. And that a lot of times, and that's what I tell everyone I encounter, and especially the clients I work with, take your time, calm your body first. Do something that feels good to you intuitively. A lot of times, just feel into that. Approach those sensations instead of
Mm-hmm.
trying to run away from them, because as long as your body feels activated, it will be difficult to think rationally. And it will be very easy
Mm-hmm.
to be prone towards um, catastrophizing and just blowing things out of proportion. Because if your body feels like it's threatened right now, if it feels like there is something to be really kind of on guard against, it's unless we really relax, if we can, to just to a certain degree, to be able to see through our thoughts better. That I think
Mm-hmm.
those two things go hand in hand: calming our body, taking a look at what's going on in our mind, and connecting the dots.
Yeah, that is absolutely so true. And again, just something that we need to be reminded of from time to time. Because I think when you're feeling anxious or panicky, you kind of scan your body for what's wrong. You kind of scan your body and think, oh God, I can feel myself starting to get hot and I can feel my tummy starting to feel funny. And sometimes it's nice to maybe scan and say,
Mhm,
what feels good? What would feel good? How can I bring this down by just 2%? Those kind of questions are really, they're
mhm,
sometimes hard to remember to ask yourself when you're really anxious, but um, I think they'd be so
mhm.
helpful.
Definitely, just having that pause, making that space. Pardon me. Um, and also, I feel like what's been helping me when I have those things come up for me, the way I feel agitated sometimes, and beginning to like enter that anxious territory is again knowing that that's just my nervous system thinking that it's doing its best for
Mm.
me, alerting me to something that's going on potentially in my environment, but potentially not. It might have been primed by the events in my past to see danger where there is none. And it's just because it's just trying to help me. And that's, like that's been very helpful for me to change and that's an attitude change. It's a mindset change. It's because if we are continuing to um, think of those symptoms as uncomfortable they are, and oh my god, a panic attack doesn't feel great at all, and anything that leads up to that is not
Mm.
great either. And at the same time, I like to remind myself in that time when I make a clear intention to do so, that it's hey, this is just my nervous system. It's thinking that it's protecting me
Mhm.
from some kind of a danger. And yeah, if I can just like approach those sensations, but in this manner, and not judge them, not judge myself, because ironically, when we judge ourselves and when we attack our sensations, we lean into the sympathetic nervous system. We reactivate our flight and fight response, which is all about attacking. So when we are judging our sensations, or we're trying to like criticize ourselves for having them, that a lot of people do, and like, oh, I'm anxious, I shouldn't be feeling like this, and on and on and on, that actually just adding fuel to that fire, not necessarily being aware of that at that time.
Mm. That kind of brings me on to my last question on if you have a
Mhm.
story for us of a time that you experienced anxiety.
Sure, and I'll try to keep it short and avoid going on tangents. I do have a story. I feel like that's the time of my life that I want to speak to, when my anxiety became really clear to me that I was having it, because I feel like I have had bouts of it all of my life, but I was really well regulated because I had my meditation practice been going strong throughout my 20s. I was a yoga teacher. I was into yoga. I had a really strong social group I was socializing in. I was an introvert, but I had those few ones that I felt close to that I can call upon when I need a bit of a grounding. So I had that to keep going and engage with the world in a more of a regulated manner until I started my grad school. And those 2 years were just filled with anxiety because, first of all, my self care went out of the window.
Mm.
I had no time for it whatsoever. And even if I had five
Mhm.
minutes to meditate, my system was so activated because I'm like, oh my God, I have to do this, I have to do that, and I have to be there on time. That was just like
Mhm.
those 5 minutes. I don't know if there were calm whatsoever. I feel like there was more anxiety than in them. So I kind of gave up on that. And for the better or worse, probably for the worse. So, and my social group just
Mhm.
got completely out of the picture because, again, I had no time to see them. Every time my friends would try to get to me, I'm like, I'll talk to you after my grad school is over. That I'll have time for you right
Oh.
there. And I think that was a perfect storm of everything for my anxiety to just come in and not obliterate me, but like becoming so strong. And then I also had an anxiety about like my student loans, like my finances. Oh my God, what I'm going to do after this. And that whole uncertainty
Mhm.
in the air about that was like really weighing down on me a lot. So I have to tell you that I did not regulate well. I'm glad I made it through
Mhm.
grad school. Somehow I feel like on the heels of all the practices that I've been building upon throughout my life that definitely allowed me to like not like just say, hey, bye, it's not for me, I can't do this. I still pulled myself through, but I could have been doing it in a much healthier way if I would be taking that time for myself, and
Mm.
also not if I didn't get into the habits that was helpful to me, I thought, but they were not. And I'm not gonna get into the details of
Mm.
that. I just want to touch upon it just a little bit so I can leave people with a resource that helped me ultimately, that I stumbled upon throughout my suffering in the grad school. And that became like such a
Mm.
big piece for the work that I do with my clients. And I think it's still very much unknown for a lot of people how anxiety is actually something that's driven by our habits a lot of times. And the resource
Mm.
that I want to share, it's the book by Dr. Jod, psychiatrist and neuroscientist who studies habits and mindfulness. It's called Unwinding Anxiety. And he talks about how a
Mm.
lot of times our anxiety is maintained and reinforced by what we do to think that we're helping ourselves. It could be anything substance related. In my case, it was tobacco. That was like the only time smoking cigarettes I thought I had for myself. And I couldn't sit still between whatever I was doing. I had to have an object to self soothe. And that's actually,
Mhm.
I wasn't happy about it. And that had me look into this whole thing. I'm like, what happening with me? What about those habits that I just so feels like so overpowering, that brought me to that book. And it got me really thinking about what are those habits that we engaging that ultimately are not good for us, but we often overlook. And that's the last thing I want to add to it, is that worrying, like that mental rehashing that we do in our mind, thinking that we're problem solving what we're not. We're really just like making ourselves feel worse as we go, or procrastination or
Mm.
self-judgment. That's also habits that all go in into making our anxiety worse and maintain it over time. The funny thing about them is that we only engage in certain activities because our brain think it's good for us. So when we try to order ourselves to stop worrying, to stop procrastinating, to stop judging, it's kind of very hard thing to do, because all of those
Mhm.
habits, they reside in a part of our brain that is more of an emotional part of the brain. It's not really that easily accessible to our cognitive behaviors coming in, behaviors, cognitive like mindsets, and just like let's willpower our way out of this. It's very hard to willpower your
Mm.
way out of anxiety. That's why it's impossible to think your way out of anxiety. And everybody who's tried know that at this point. But we still do this because worrying and overthinking is such a pull to do when you feel anxious. But it's counterproductive. That's what I guess my last
Yeah.
message in this thing gonna be. But that's was my close encounter with anxiety during my grad school, learning how detrimental many different things that I was doing to myself were, and really
Mm.
learning how to rewire that whole system by the very method that it's in that book. It's very simple but profound method that everybody can find in that book. And I highly hire everybody who comes to me and speak about anxiety. I'm like, unwinding anxiety. This is it. And the polyvagal theory. I mean, everybody can recommend whatever they want, but this is like two big loves of my life. Take them and use them.
Thank you so much. I wish when I was younger I had seen this. I mean, I still struggle quite a lot with anxiety, and I'm definitely going to take both those things away and study them. That has been so, so helpful. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. Is there somewhere that we can find you for the people that are listening?
Yes, thank you for listening. I first of all, for all of the different things I shared. Yes, you can find me on Instagram as of right now. My website is still under construction, and my Blooming Heart dash hypnotherapy. That's my name on it. Feel free to say hello and ask away all of your questions. This is my jam. Obviously, I can talk about this forever if you let me. So feel free to just contact me there anytime.
You have been so, so, so great. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to talk to me. I feel like I've learned so much. I actually feel calmer right now. And it's just nice getting these nuggets of information from you because I feel like it gives me a bit more hope. And I hope that for anybody listening, it can give you a bit more hope that you don't have to stay in the anxiety. There's more pieces of the puzzle to be found. If you would also like to come on the podcast and chat to me, you can go to our description of wherever you're listening to this podcast. We would love to have you. Or if you're too shy for that, that's okay. We can have your anonymous stories read out on the podcast and nobody will know it was you. Thank you for listening, everybody, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.